Mankind has always been fascinated with the idea of travelling to the moon, even long before the Apollo 11 mission in 1969 when Neil Armstrong took his first small step onto its surface.
You can trace stories of lunar travel as far back as the writings of LUNE in the 2nd century, but in terms of more modern media, Georges Méliès' Le Voyage dans la Lune in 1902 is widely considered the first example of practically countless films about the moon and space. The idea of another visible world so close yet so far from ours has long since captured the imaginations of us Earthlings and permeated our popular culture, and that includes video games.
It's 50 years this month since the first moon landing, so with that in mind, let's take a look at some examples of how the moon's been represented in gaming.
Funnily enough, video games first landed on the moon around the same time as humans in 1969. Only a few months after the Apollo 11 mission in July, the lunar landing game was created by Massachusetts student Jim Storer. This text-based game had you calculate and input the amount of fuel you wanted to burn in order to safely land a hypothetical shuttle. While Mr. Storer didn't pursue a career in game development,
in fairness, that wasn't really a thing at the time,
his creation influenced Moonlander a few years later in 1973, which took the concept but introduced a graphical element. Atari would go on to create an arcade version a few years later, in which players inserted coins to fuel their rocket, and introduced a competitive element by awarding bonus points for landing on certain areas.
This, along with other influential cabinets like Space Raiders... no, those are crisps. This, along with other influential cabinets like Space Invaders and Lunar Rescue, came to define the arcade era and cement space exploration in video gaming.
A song and dance was quite literally made about Mario going to the moon in Super Mario Odyssey, but the plumber has in fact been there at least twice in his career already, 15 years ago in Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, and as far back as 27 years ago in Super Mario Land 2 on the Game Boy. Games like these have used the change in gravitational physics on the moon to subvert expectations of platforming levels, making players deal with weightlessness. You aren't doing a quick straightforward hop in an enemy's head anymore, you've got a trajectory to consider.
The other big platforming icon, Sonic on the other hand, has always shown scant regard for spatial gravity. Or oxygen.
The blue blur's been to space several times, but only once to the moon itself in Sonic Advance, despite the fact Dr. Eggman had blown half of it up prior to that in Sonic Adventure 2 in an act of mustachioed terrorism. Even for a typical comic supervillain, the moon's used here to frame one of Eggman's darker moments. On the subject of darker themes, the moon has commonly been used as a location in which to house alien races, as seen in the likes of Final Fantasy IV, Killer is Dead and Destiny. And in that regard it's also been an obvious choice of setting for blasting some enemies in action shooters, but a few of these have taken it deeper than this. Wolfenstein: The New Order sees the Nazis win World War II, taking over the American space program and establishing lunar bases. Prey, on the other hand, depicts a world in which President Kennedy wasn't assassinated, accelerating the space race between the United States and Russia in the 1960s and leading to a world heavily inspired by that era.
Both games, in a way, use the moon as a reference point to retell modern history, albeit with a more sinister tone. Then there's one of my favourite games, Portal 2, which uses the moon to jaw-dropping effect in its final scenes.
Trapped in a laboratory and armed only with a gun that creates two linked-up portals, the crumbling roof reveals the moon in all its glory, the last thing you'll see before you die. There's such a palpable tension when you realise what you have to do. Fire your last portal up at it, creating a gateway between this room and the lunar surface, causing a vacuum and effectively using the moon as a weapon to help you defeat the final boss.
Speaking of dangerous moons, undoubtedly the most iconic symbolic depiction of it in gaming is the sunken-eyed monstrosity that hangs above the land of Termina in The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask.
In a surreal world where you're frequently rewinding time, the moon is one of the few things that remain constant, watching you almost like a god as you heal the inhabitants' pain and cause it all over again. It even has an ethereal heavenly plane inside it, populated by mysterious children who ask strange existential questions, as though speaking directly to the player. It's definitely one of the most memorable elements of a classic Zelda game, one that sticks in many players' memories for breaking the conventions of the series.
To the Moon is another title that, as the name suggests, circles around Earth's satellite.
This bittersweet wee story-based game sees two scientists attempt to unravel a dying man's mysterious desire to visit the moon before he passes away, so that they can manipulate his memories in his final moments. While space travel has long since been a symbol of mankind's collective ambition and scientific achievement, To the Moon uses it to frame the story of one man's ambition and all the intrigue, charm, tension and sadness that goes with it. While the games we looked at previously show how its relationship with the moon could change the world at large, this game uses it to show how obsession can change just one person's world for better or worse.
Some games, on the other hand, are used in a less symbolic manner and are aimed a little closer at home.
The recently released Ritual of the Moon, with its very striking handmade visuals, is the story of a witch exiled to the moon, and it's played over a real-life 28-day lunar cycle, with the player's decisions affecting the future of the Earth. It's as much a meditation tool as it is a video game, designed to make the player undertake some self-reflection. Another much less symbolic game is Moonbase Alpha, an award-winning simulation of a day in the life of a lunar astronaut that was actually created by NASA Learning Technologies alongside US Army developers. It's a bit of a tedious experience from what I've sampled, but still an interesting example of video games being utilised in wider society. But after all that, if this was a competition, it's a toss-up between Race into Space and Space Program Manager, simulations actually developed in consultation with the second man on the moon, Buzz Aldrin himself. Then there's Mass Effect 3, which actually has him voice a character in the closing scenes. You don't get much more of a link between the moon and gaming than that.
Every world could be home to a different form of life. And every life is a special story of its own.
Thank you for watching the video, and be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed it. Have you played many of the games that I've spoken about today, or what other moon-based titles do you enjoy? Let us know down there.